Hey, you ready to really get into some economic stuff? We're going to take a deep dive into Chapter 6 of Trade Wars Are Class Wars today,
Ooh.
which is all about the U.S. current account deficit, which, we always hear about how America owes so much money to the rest of the world.
Mm,
But this chapter, it goes way deeper than just blaming it on Americans spending too much.
exactly. Yeah, it's a way more complicated story.
Yeah, and thankfully I've got an expert speaker here to help us kind of unpack this whole thing.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Um, so the chapter, like, right away, it dives into this idea of an exorbitant burden.
Mm.
So what is that, and how does it connect to the U.S. deficit?
Well, you see, the US dollar, it's not just any currency, right? It's like the reserve currency for the whole world.
Right, yeah.
So that means other countries use it for trade, they hold it in reserve, they even price oil and gold in dollars.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so there's this constant demand for dollars, which on the surface sounds kind of nice, right?
Yeah, like a privilege almost.
Right, but Chapter 6 is saying that this actually forces the U.S. to kind of absorb the economic weirdness of other countries.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it's not a privilege. It's more like we're stuck with it.
Yeah, kind of like we're shouldering everyone else's imbalances.
I see. So
Mm.
how does that play out in the real world then?
Well, think about the housing bubble back in the 2000s. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So Chapter 6 is saying that that's directly connected to this huge global demand for safe assets, like U.S. Treasury bonds.
We're using other countries contributed to our housing bubble?
That's what the chapter is arguing, yeah.
Wow.
Like
Okay.
foreign investors, especially those with way too much savings, they were looking for somewhere safe to put their money.
Makes sense.
And the US, with our financial markets and the dollar being seen as stable, we were like a giant magnet.
So all that foreign money coming into the U.S. is what blew up the housing market.
It's all supply and demand, right? So
Mhm.
this flood of foreign money, it kept interest rates really low. And low interest rates mean borrowing is cheaper, especially for mortgages. So everyone's like, hey, let's buy a house.
Right. So demand goes up, prices go up, and boom, you have a bubble.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Americans wanting bigger houses. It was this global thing we never even think about.
That's crazy.
And it wasn't just housing either. This also impacted American manufacturing, which is a big point the chapter makes.
Right. It wasn't just about competition from cheap imports like we always hear.
Nope, it's more complicated than that. See, Chapter 6 says there was this global glut of goods driven by low wages and too much savings in some countries.
Like where?
Germany's a big one they talk about.
Mhm.
And all these cheap goods, they flooded the market and undercut American production, which means jobs lost here.
Oh, wow. So one country's policies can really mess things up for another country's workers?
That's the point the book is making. It's all connected. And the thing is, this didn't just stop after the 2008 crisis either.
Really? You'd think things would have reset after that.
You'd think so. But even though American consumers were spending less, the deficit didn't really shrink.
So what happened?
Well, the source of the money changed, but the demand for U.S. assets stayed strong. This time, it was more private investors, especially in Europe.
Okay, so even after a huge crisis, the U.S. was still stuck with this exorbitant burden.
Yeah, it's kind of a puzzle, right? You saw how fragile the U.S. financial system was, but they still wanted in.
So why were European investors so interested in the U.S. even after all that?
Well, Chapter 6 suggests that it goes back to this safe asset shortage we talked about before.
Okay, you remind me what that is again? And how does it relate to what Germany was doing?
Sure, so think of it like this. When a country like Germany exports way more than they import and keeps wages low so their stuff is cheap,
Okay.
they end up with tons of savings but not enough places to invest it at home.
Makes sense.
So where does all that extra money go? It flows to places that seem safe and stable, like the U.S.
So we're the safe haven for their extra cash?
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you're finding value in what I'm sharing, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on all my latest content. And don't forget to tap the notification bell. That way, you'll get a heads up every time a new video drops, so you won't miss a thing. Plus, it really helps the channel grow. So thank you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and let's keep growing this amazing community together.
Exactly. And it creates this weird cycle, right? The U.S. needs to keep borrowing money to satisfy this demand for our assets.
Which makes the deficit even bigger.
Yeah, and it makes us really dependent on foreign capital, which can be risky if things change globally.
This is blowing my mind. It's we can't just look at how much Americans are spending to understand the deficit.
You got it. We have to look at the whole world and how all these financial flows connect.
Wow. Chapter 6 is really making me think differently about all this.
Yeah.
And you said it talks about the cost of this exorbitant burden too, right?
Right. It says this constant need to absorb foreign savings has real consequences for the U.S. economy and workers.
Yeah, let's talk about, you mentioned manufacturing before. What's the connection there?
Well, the chapter says that the decline of American manufacturing, which everyone blames on globalization,
Right.
it's actually tied to this global savings glut and the deficit.
Okay, how?
Think about it, when countries suppress wages and their people don't buy much stuff,
Okay.
that weakens demand around the world. And guess who ends up buying all that extra stuff?
The U.S.
Yeah.
Since we import more than we export.
Exactly. We become the dumping ground for all these surplus goods,
Wow.
which hurts our own production. Factories, close jobs are lost. It's a whole chain reaction.
It's wild how this abstract thing, a current account deficit, can actually affect people's jobs and lives.
That's what the book is highlighting. And remember, that housing bubble?
Yeah.
All that foreign money helped inflate that bubble, which made houses less affordable and more likely to crash.
Oh, right. And that crash really hurt a lot of people.
Exactly. So it's not just numbers on a page, it's about real people's lives.
This is a lot to take in.
It is. But the good news is, Chapter 6 also talks about some potential solutions, some ways to fix this.
Okay, I need some good news here. Are we just stuck with this burden forever?
Well, they argue that what we're doing now isn't sustainable, and they offer some ideas, but it's complicated and it'll take a global effort.
So what needs to change to make things more balanced?
Yeah, they're talking about surplus countries.
Hmm.
The ones with those big current account surpluses like Germany and China.
Yeah.
They say those countries need to take responsibility for their part in this whole mess.
So what does that look like? What would they actually have to do?
Well, they'd need to change their whole economic strategy. Instead of just focusing on exports and keeping wages low to make their stuff cheap, they could try to boost demand at home.
I see.
Like maybe give their citizens more social safety nets so they feel secure enough to spend more, or encourage higher wages so people have more money in their pockets, or even invest in big infrastructure projects, to get their own economy moving.
Yeah, that makes sense. But those are some pretty big changes.
Yeah.
Those policies have been in place for a long time. Do you think those countries would actually do that?
It's definitely a tough sell. The book admits that it's not going to happen overnight, but they also make the point that this current system, it's not working for anyone, not even the surplus countries.
Oh, really? I thought they were benefiting from this whole situation.
Not in the long run. You see, when you're so focused on exports, your economy becomes really sensitive to what's happening globally. Like, if demand for your goods drops, suddenly your whole country can feel it.
Right, that makes sense.
And hoarding all those foreign assets, it might seem like a good idea, but it can lead to bubbles and instability in other countries, which can eventually come back to bite you.
So it's like a house of cards. It might look stable for a while, but it can all come crashing down.
Exactly. And the book argues that a more balanced system where everyone contributes to demand would be much better for the whole world.
Okay, so that means everyone needs to cooperate and be willing to change their ways.
That's the ideal scenario, but it's definitely easier said than done.
Totally. But you mentioned that the book also suggests some things that the U.S. can do right.
Yeah. While we can't solve this global problem on our own, there are some policy changes that could help.
Like what?
One idea is to invest strategically in American industries, especially the ones that have been hurt by this flood of cheap imports.
So give them some extra support.
Exactly, like maybe targeted subsidies or tax breaks to encourage investment, or even have the government specifically buy American-made products.
So we're not talking about shutting ourselves off from trade, but more like leveling the playing field a bit.
Right. Give American businesses and workers a fighting chance. And another idea they float is capital controls.
Capital controls, what are those?
It's basically a way to limit how much foreign money comes into the U.S.
That sounds kind of intense. How would that work?
There are different ways to do it, like taxes on foreign investments or restrictions on certain types of transactions.
Right.
The goal is to prevent too much foreign money from destabilizing things and to give our government more control over our own economy.
So it's about finding that balance between being open to global markets and protecting our own interests.
Exactly. It's a tricky balance, and there's no easy answer. But the main point Chapter 6 is making is that we can't just ignore these global imbalances.
Yeah, they're clearly having a real impact on us.
On jobs, wages, even our housing market, it's all connected.
Wow. This has been a really eye-opening conversation. So what's the most important thing you want listeners to take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the U.S. current account deficit, it's not just some abstract number. It's tied to decisions being made all over the world.
Right. It's a global issue.
Exactly. And if we want to build a better economic future for everyone, we need to understand how all these pieces fit together.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, this has definitely given me a lot to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
My pleasure, anytime. So they talk about like a more balanced approach to trade and finance, like overall.
Okay.
They say these surplus countries, the ones always running surpluses like Germany
Right.
or China, they got to step up and own their part in creating this imbalance.
So what would that even look like in reality? Like, what changes are we talking about?
Well, it's about shifting their economic policies.
Yeah.
Instead of just focusing on exports and keeping wages super low to be competitive,
Yeah.
they could try boosting demand inside their own countries.
How would they do that?
Well, they could make their social safety nets stronger so people feel more secure to spend money.
Okay.
Maybe encourage higher wages so people actually have more money to spend.
Right.
And invest in infrastructure projects to get their own economies moving.
That all sounds good, but those are some pretty huge changes.
Yeah.
Like, these policies have been around forever. Do you think those countries would actually go for that?
I mean, it's a big challenge. The book even says that.
Yeah.
It's not like it's going to happen overnight.
Right.
But they're saying this current system where a few countries are the world's savers and everyone else has to be the spenders.
Yeah.
It's just not sustainable. And it's actually hurting everybody, even the surplus countries themselves.
Wait, really? How does it hurt them? I thought they were winning in this situation.
Well, when your whole economy depends on exports,
Okay.
you're super vulnerable to anything happening globally. Like if demand for your stuff drops suddenly,
Oh, yeah.
your whole economy tanks.
Yeah.
And all those foreign assets they've been hoarding,
Right.
it might seem smart, but it can cause bubbles and instability in other countries, which eventually comes back to bite them.
So it's like a ticking time bomb.
Kinda, yeah. And what the book is saying is that a world where demand is spread out more evenly would be way more stable for everyone.
That makes sense. But it sounds like that would take a lot of global cooperation.
Definitely. It's the ideal, but getting everyone on board is the hard part.
Absolutely. So is there anything the U.S. can do on our end while we're waiting for the rest of the world to get their act together?
Oh, yeah. There are definitely things we can do domestically to kind of lessen the blow of this exorbitant burden.
Like what?
Well, one idea is to be more strategic about investing in our own industries.
Yeah.
The ones that have been hit hard by all those cheap imports.
Okay, so give them some extra help.
Exactly, like maybe targeted subsidies or tax breaks to encourage companies to invest here,
Okay.
or even have the government prioritize buying American-made products.
So it's not about shutting ourselves off from trade,
Right.
but more about being smarter about how we engage with it.
Exactly. We got to give American businesses and workers a fair shot. And there's this other idea they talk about called capital controls.
Capital controls, what's that?
It's basically putting some limits on how much foreign money can flow into the U.S.
That sounds kind of drastic. How would that even work?
There are different ways to do it, like maybe taxes on foreign investments or limits on certain types of financial transactions.
Okay.
The goal is to stop too much foreign money from messing things up and to give our government more control over our own economic situation.
So it's all about finding that balance, right? Between being open to the global market and protecting our own interests.
Exactly. It's a tricky balance and there's no one perfect solution. But the point the book is making is that we can't just ignore these global imbalances. They have real consequences for us.
Yeah, on jobs, wages, even our housing market. It's all connected, like you said.
It is. And it's not just about economics, it's about people's lives.
Right.
And that's really what this book is trying to get across.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I'm seeing the world in a whole new way.
Glad to hear it.
And I think you're right. The most important takeaway is that this current account deficit, it's not just some abstract number. It's tied to decisions being made all over the world. And if we want a better economic future for everyone,
Right?
we need to start understanding these connections and asking some tough questions.
Absolutely. We can't just keep doing things the way we've always done them.
Well said. I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been truly enlightening.
My pleasure. I always enjoy a good econ chat.
And to our listeners out there, keep those questions coming and keep learning, because the more we know about these global forces, the better equipped we are to create the kind of future we want to see. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. I've got a lot more coming your way, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey with me. And if you found this helpful, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Thanks again. And see you in the next video.